ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum. It's a great honor and a great privilege, as always. These Mondays are a consistent theme that I look forward to. It's a great way to begin each week. We're still kind of engaging in this critical discussion series where we're just choosing topics, seems like covering a book or trying to study, something more structured. I just don't think Zoom is as well suited to that as in-person instruction. So in the interim, and it could be, a number of months yet to come, we're having kind of a critical discussion series where we're looking at different issues from week to week and just having a conversation about them as a class. And this is a really cool, really laid back, really low pressure kind of space. I looked at the topics and I was blown away because there was kind of like multiple topics that it seemed like, folks, wanted to talk about, or maybe folks had some questions or ideas they wanted to share concerning. One of them was Sharia and, American civil law, kind of, the implementation of those and how that looks. The other questions or the other topics were about marriage. In terms of Sharia and American civil law, I think we can maybe get to that, but I'm much more interested actually in the topic of marriage and just what you guys are thinking about that. SubhanAllah, I talked to a friend earlier that used to attend our class until he moved east, and he informed me that he was getting married in a couple of weeks. And that was really, really exciting news, really, really good news. And even though I know some people regard it as commonplace, I'm still very impressed with young Muslims who are choosing to marry in an environment in which marriage is not the only kind of relationship that gives one access to, intimacy and self-exploration and, all the things that romantic relationships offer. Marriage is not the only means through which those things are sought kind of in our time and place. It's only halal, right, means, but it also entails a lot of responsibility. It entails a high level of commitment. It's something very public. The family knows, the community knows. So it's really kind of like taking a natural affinity that two people might have toward each other or for each other to kind of the summit, to the highest point, to the zenith of, romantic relationships. And, along with that comes a lot of great opportunities for growth, for you to demonstrate patience, for you to demonstrate understanding, for you to demonstrate forgiveness, but also all of those things I mentioned are also challenges that marriage presents us with as well. Patience, a challenge; forgiveness, a challenge; growth, an incessant challenge. So there's a lot of different angles we can look at, marriage through. If there were, I remember from the chat, I remember there was a more specific angle about maybe resolving marital conflict, and another more specific question about the general topic of marriage. Did anybody want to unmute and just ask their question, or Randa, did you want to look in the chat and see exactly what those questions were?
Yeah, so we had a few, some around divorce. So the first one was, is divorce allowed for this reason, no longer in love with your spouse?
Yes.
That,
Bismillah. You know, there's a lot of misconception and misunderstanding around the concept of divorce in the Sharia. Divorce as a talaq, and I have to explain, the word talaqa means to release something. It means to let something go. So talaq, which is the word for Arabic, which is the word for divorce in Arabic, it literally means to take the reins off of something or to release something or to let it go. And men have the exclusive right to pronounce a divorce. Men own this right exclusively because much of the financial burden of marriage is considered to be, I know things have changed drastically in our time, but the assumption of the law is that men are, by their own, of their own volition, choosing to undertake great financial responsibility in asking a woman to take their hands, or asking women to take their hands in marriage. And that because he's offering the mahar, because he's offering maybe many marital gifts leading up to the dowry, maybe many gifts after the dowry, he's taken on the responsibility of providing housing, providing clothing, providing food, nourishment, safety, etc. When a man decides that he no longer wants to maintain or retain a woman as his wife, he is not allowed to even make mention of anything that he's given her. He made his choice to marry, and now he's making his choice to divorce. And a man can divorce for, the Prophet ﷺ said, أَبْغَضُ الْحَلَالِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الطَّلَاقُ, that the most disliked of the halal things to God is divorce. But a man does have that right, although he is not to prevail upon the woman that he's divorcing or her family requesting to be compensated or requesting to be requited or requesting anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, even if you had given a valley of gold to the woman that you're divorcing, you should not ask for a single dirham, a single piece of it back. On the other hand, women, now men have kind of this exclusive right to pronounce divorce, but women are not hostages in their marriages, and women also can initiate a separation. Women can ask, women can state that they don't want to be in the relationship any longer. So in that, in the sense of, and this is maybe an important semantic difference when trying to explain Islamic family law to our neighbors, colleagues, friends, brothers and sisters from other religious communities. No, women can initiate a separation from their partners. Where that separation differs from divorce is that if that separation, and I'm coming to your precise point now, if that separation is something that was decided upon in response to some kind of neglect, some kind of mistreatment, some kind of abuse, then a woman can demand a divorce from her husband. Or if the husband is unwilling, she can get an annulment of that marriage from whoever, an imam, just a relevant authority. Of course, we don't have Islamic family courts. Ordinarily, that would come from a qadi, that would come from an Islamic judge. She can demand an annulment or she can demand a divorce from her husband. If, on the other hand, she has just had a change of heart, not, it's not the result of neglect or abuse or negligence or mistreatment. She just realizes that in marrying this man and allowing this man to take my hand, I've made a mistake. This is not what I want. This is not how I want to spend the rest of my life. This is something that I want to undo as quickly as possible. That is something called a khuda, right? And khuda means to also to remove, right? But when a woman initiates a separation, not as a result of abuse or neglect, but just as a result of a change of heart, a change of mind, she usually, and this is where we're talking about the first topic, right? This is where Islamic law differs from American civil law. It's understood that she is willing to enter into some kind of arbitration, some kind of mediation to determine the terms of her leaving the marriage. So the hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, a woman among the companions, it might have been Ayman, or maybe not, it might have been another woman among the companions of the Prophet, may God be pleased with them. She married a man and she just wasn't in love with the man, didn't want to be with this man. And she went to the Prophet and she disclosed to him that, as a long-term arrangement, this isn't going to work out for me. And the Prophet simply asked her, what did he offer you as a gift, as a dowry? She said, a bustan, like an orchard, which is a very substantive, a very substantial, substantive was the wrong word, but a very substantial dowry. It's quite substantial, a whole kind of orchard of, different kinds of vegetation, fruit trees, vegetable plants, etc. And the Prophet said to her, are you willing to give back that, orchard? And she said, yes. And she returned his orchard to him and they went their separate ways. And that is a khula. And the reason for that, and this is, kind of a significant difference, is that in American civil law, it's assumed that both men and women bring to their marriage, both the man and the woman is bringing to the marriage certain assets, right? Certain assets, whatever their personal assets are. And if they, when they are together, unless there's some kind of prenuptial arrangement, postnuptial arrangement, in some states, they immediately become one financial entity. And in some states, everything that they gain over the course of the marriage is kind of shared communal property. So when they divorce, no matter who initiates the divorce, the man or the woman, there's a settlement in terms of what is going where. In Islamic law, the man is the only one that assumes financial responsibility, legal financial responsibility. The woman does not assume any. Because of that, if she decides that she wants out of the marriage simply because she's had a change of heart, that usually entails negotiating some, whatever terms both parties regard as amicable to, I guess, settle that divorce that is initiated by the wife, if you will. Are there any questions about that? I feel like I heard somebody unmuting.
Assalamu alaikum, Ubaid. So for the khula, isn't that something typically in Islam where the female has to negotiate that in her marriage contract before hand? Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to.
No. She always has that. She always has that option. She
Okay.
she always has the option to do a khula. But I don't. When I'm counseling people, I don't recommend the khula unless it is just a pure change of heart. If it's just most of the time, there was something that happened, some mistreatment, some abuse, verbal or physical, there was something, in which case what she wants is a divorce. And then she doesn't have to negotiate anything. In fact, in that case, the man is forbidden to ask for anything. Do you understand the difference? It's kind of like,
yeah.
Women say like, I want a khula. And I'm like, why? Well, he struck me, or he cursed me, or he humiliated me. It's like, no, you don't want a khula. You want a divorce.
Yeah. So like
a different thing.
Is that different? Is that different than Ubayd? From like, what are the grounds for divorce in Islam? For example, like if the spouse left Islam, they are insane, they're not financially supporting the spouse. So that's different than khula?
Yes, that's actually, all of those things either lead to divorce or annulment.
Okay.
Right? So divorce, all of those things are things where it's like, the woman could leave the marriage without needing to negotiate or return any money, or there's no she's financially free of obligation. The man didn't hold up his end of the bargain if like he left Islam, or say he had some issues with his mental health, or he was negligent in financially making provision for her. The man just didn't hold up his end of the bargain. She incurs no penalty for that. She incurs, there's no need for her to negotiate anything. I wanted to be married. I committed to being married, and my husband didn't hold up his end of the bargain, whether that was in providing for me or affording me kind treatment, or there was something he didn't do. And so I want this marriage either terminated via his divorce or annulled via some authority. You see what I'm saying? Whereas if it's a pure change of heart, like the man really didn't do anything wrong, I don't have any complaint about his character, nor about his faith, nor about his treatment of me. I just don't want to be here. Now, if that woman had received, let's just use a round number, $20,000 from this guy, and let's just use a round amount of time, 2 months, maybe 2 months ago they got married. Her mahar was 20,000. She just woke up one day and thought, nah, I don't want to do this. What Islamic law is saying is that, okay, there has to be some negotiation about what's going to happen with the 20,000 or some other amount. There has to be some, what are we, that we're entering some negotiation about how we're going to kind of resolve this amicably. Whereas in Western civil law, I can't speak all Western, but at least in the state of Illinois, they go their separate ways, and they can, there will be probably proceedings afterward to determine what goes to who in terms of their assets.
Thank you.
Yeah, mashallah. Sister Yesha.
Yes. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into he isn't upholding his end of the bargain. Islamically speaking, what all can that entail? And please feel free to be as exhaustive as possible.
So the main, okay, so we have 3 material obligations, three financial obligations, and then you have 1 physical obligation. So the financial obligations are to provide housing, and by housing, let me understand what, and this is where, I don't want to create any arguments in any marriages, but it's important that men recognize, if we're going to talk about Islamic law, it's important that we recognize how generous a lot of modern women are, because inside of housing it's not, there's housing, right? And the housing must be provided at what we would refer to as a reasonable standard, right? It has to be provided for at like a reasonable standard, and that's very subjective. What's reasonable for folks in Lincoln Park or someone that grew up in Lincoln Park, and what's reasonable for folks in Auburn Gresham, it's just two different things. Auburn Gresham is another area in Chicago, or what's reasonable for folks in Old Town versus what's reasonable for folks in South Shore. But it has to be housing that is understood to be decent, safe, clean, reasonable. Inside of that, and this is what I was about to say, upkeep for the house, meaning women have no Islamic obligation to do housework. That's not a thing. I know culturally some people think that is a thing, but if a woman were to, and I don't think this is healthy for marriages at all, but I'm speaking now in the capacity of just law. I'm not talking about emotion and partnership and togetherness and love and teamwork, and we're just talking law. If a woman were to say, I don't wash dishes and I don't straighten up, I don't do any of that, the man would then have to provide housekeeping, or he would have to provide service to also get that done. That goes inside of housing. There's also clothing. Clothing is another kind of material necessity, and again, it must be provided in a reasonable manner. In this instance, most of the Islamic legal scholars, they say reasonability is that which is determined by the man's own living standard, right? It's determined by his own living standard. So that if he shops at Neiman Marcus, he should buy her clothes from Neiman Marcus. On the other hand, if he shops at the Salvation Army, then it's reasonable for him to buy his wife's clothes from the Salvation Army, right? There's also food, which has to be provided for in a reasonable way, and which is, again, not conditioned. The clothes are conditioned by what, if you have a man that only eats, dal chawal or something like that, just rice and lentils, and the woman says, well, I that's not reasonable for me to only eat rice and whatever you eat every day. I need something. There's whatever the cultural standard is for like reasonable food is something that also must be provided. And then inside of all of those kind of material obligations, they all must be provided with kindness. They can't be provided with ihana, with abuse, and if a person is providing those things, but they're doing it while making the person feel as though they're a burden. Oh, this is so I gotta pay for all this. My rent is this and this, and I lost my job, and you sitting here, and that is a complete. The obligations are not, even if the obligations are materially being met, the attitude, because if it's not done in a spirit of obligation, in a spirit of responsibility, in a spirit of acceptance, that I accept this is my responsibility. When I asked or I agreed to become a husband, this is what I asked for. This is what I was supposed to do. And then the physical demand is intimacy. Most, and I don't want to upset anybody. Some people are, a little prudish when it comes to these topics. I don't want to upset anybody, but the strongest opinion in the Sharia is that a man must be intimate with his wife within 4 days of her requesting intimacy with him. And the only reason that 4-day stipulation is there is because this is what I was saying about people being a bit prudish. If he were married to 4 wives, right, because there is an Islamic provision that a man could be married to up to 4 women, it would be unreasonable for him to have to meet different obligations. So within 4 days, he's responsible for meeting that physical demand as well. And I think those are kind of the bare bones kind of responsibilities of a husband in marriage. I don't know if I'm leaving anything. Did you have a question about anything in particular?
No, that pretty much covers it. But I did want to touch a little bit on the intimacy bit a little bit, because I've come across a lot of people, I mean, shockingly, a lot of women who have complained about not having that part of their marriage. So the one thing that I want to know is what would be what would be the longest that a man would be able to withhold that from a wife? And at any point, is there like...
Well, I mean, legally, after 4 days, there could be a legitimate case raised in terms of neglect. There's, after now, again, I think, and this is me kind of, taking off my one hat, taking off my legal hat, and just putting on my brother hat. If a couple is talking about rights, legal obligations, and things like that with regard to their kind of intimate and that private dimension of their marriage, the marriage is already in trouble. I mean, it's not, if a person has to, make recourse to legal arguments to get intimate time with their spouse, the marriage is already, there needs to be an intervention just then. I mean, because if that were the case, the husband or the wife is probably not going to be the emotional connectivity they're looking for, knowing that this person is doing this because it's some kind of responsibility, is probably not going to be resolved through the physical act.
Right. No, completely understood and agreed.
Right.
So,
right.
So this is, and I'm going to stop taking up space after this. So
no, you're good.
Okay. So let's say that there's a scenario where there hasn't been anything between the husband and the wife, say, I don't know, like 6 months or so. The divorce happens. It's a done deal. Now, my understanding is that the iddah is based on the 90 days to rule out any possibility of a pregnancy or anything like that. But if the woman hasn't been able to enjoy any kind of physical intimacy with her husband for more than that, and in this case, twice that, is there any difference in conditionality in which her iddah period is going to be, or should this woman be free to be able to get back to the business of her life as soon as possible, because really in practice there hasn't been a marriage?
No, there's still, it's interesting, man. This issue of iddah, yes, you're absolutely right, man. And mashallah, I'm impressed with your grasp and knowledge of the subject. The iddah, the original, I guess, purpose of iddah is making sure that there is no pregnancy, so that lineages aren't confused, and is this the father, or is this the father? Who's the father? But even in the case of women that are past the age of childbearing, they still, if they get divorced, they still have an iddah, right? Even even women that are past the age of childbearing, if they get divorced, they still have an iddah. So some scholars say the purpose of iddah is making sure that there is no pregnancy. But even if it is, medically proven that a woman is incapable of conceiving, she still has an iddah period from the time the divorce is pronounced. And there's many different opinions about what the wisdom of that might be, in terms of just not going from relationship to relationship, or taking that time to kind of settle and kind of gain some closure before moving on, etc. It's one of those things that I've never seen any opinion to the contrary, like that a woman doesn't have an iddah if she hasn't been intimate with her husband, or if she's past the age of childbearing, or if it's medically proven by physicians that she's incapable of conceiving, she still has an iddah.
And is it still 90 days no matter what?
And it's still 90 days no matter what.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still 90 days no matter what.
Okay. That ends my line of questioning.
No. Alhamdulillah, all very, very good questions. Very good questions. I saw
but you
that
can
Donna had a
leave the
question.
house. Yeah, I actually have a question, but also another one. You can leave the house during your iddah, right? Because I heard like in the Gulf, they give you paid time off from work so that you don't go into work during that period.
Well, this is it leave the house and leave the house, two different things, and we have two different kinds of divorces. So you have one kind of divorce, which we would say is talaq raj'i. It's a divorce, and it's like an initial divorce or a second divorce, in which a person, if now during the iddah, all iddat, men are still financially responsible for their partners, right? All iddat, right? Men are always financially responsible for their partners. But it is understood and implied that that financial responsibility is contingent upon her still residing in the home of the marriage. So that, thinking about it in the reverse, the situation is not that the man pronounces the divorce, the woman says, I'm going to the Four Seasons, I'll send you my bill. Do you see what I'm saying? Or the man pronounces a divorce, she goes to the JW Marriott, sends him the bill. No, his obligation to provide, even though they are sleeping apart from each other and they are not intimate, his obligation to provide, but during that iddah period, if she wants reconciliation with him, it's actually, or he wants reconciliation with her, it's actually recommended. And this is why the iddah is maybe the biggest preventative in terms of divorce that we have in our marriage law canon. She doesn't have to wear hijab. Like after the pronouncement of the initial divorce, she doesn't have to cover in front of him. They still live together. If she desires reconciliation with him, attempting to seduce him or attempting to have some kind of intimate contact with him is mustahab, is something recommended. The same thing for him. If he wants to reconcile with her, if he wants to, mend fences, he wants to patch things up, attempting to seduce her or to proposition her or to draw her into some kind of intimate contact is also recommended. And that if they have so much as a kiss, the marriage is just considered resumed, right? They're just back. They don't need a new contract, new gift, new marital gift. The marriage is just kind of resumed. So for all of that to take place, the woman needs to reside in the home of the marriage during the duration of the iddah. Now, she can leave the house, like to go out to, get a, to go to work, to go where she goes for recreation, to go out with her friends, to go out for entertainment. She can go out. But by leaving the house, she forfeits the iddah. That means if she decides to live elsewhere, meaning after the divorce is pronounced, if she decides I'm going back to live with my parents or I'm moving out, getting an apartment of my own, the man is then free of the responsibility of financially providing for her in that instance, unless, of course, her leaving is the result of abuse or, it's physically unsafe for her to be there or emotionally unsafe for her to be there. Then she gets to be elsewhere and the man still has the obligation to take care of everything. But I think what I heard in your question was kind of a misunderstanding of what is meant by leaving the house. Like she can leave the house to come back, but if she decides to live elsewhere, in that sense, leaving the house, then the man is not financially obliged to provide for her as she is living elsewhere. Does that make it clear?
Yes, thank you so much. And can you also speak to child custody and how that works out?
Yeah, Bismillah. You know, child custody is kind of a wild goose chase, you know, in the Sharia, because again, the assumption, and I think a lot of times when we approach these laws in kind of a contemporary modern context, the issue that we continually bump up against, I think, is that women work, women, you know, make money, and a lot of women do support their families financially. Maybe not, maybe 50-50. Maybe some women support some women are the breadwinners in their families. Maybe not 50-50. Maybe just, you know, some kind of contribution. But in the Sharia, the assumption is, and this is different than, you know, a lot of the extant laws in the United States. The man is assumed to be 100% financially responsible for his children until they reach an age of majority for the boys and until they marry for the girls. The man is considered 100% financially responsible, you know, for them. With that, child custody becomes kind of like, okay, in as much as he's financially responsible, if the children are of age, of course, if the children are nursing, the children, of course, have to be with their mother, and the man has to provide for that woman and for those children until the baby is weaned. So for the entire duration of the nursing, the man has to provide food, clothing, shelter, everything for the ex-wife now and the children. You know, a lot of people don't realize it. This is subhanAllah wa the realness of the Quran. The verse, La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha, the verse where Allah says Allah does not burden a soul with more than it can bear, is actually mentioned after that ruling, that if a woman is nursing a child and the man divorces her, he has to provide financially for that woman her total living expense, everything, until the child is weaned, which, you know, could be 2 years, depending on how long the woman decides to nurse. And then Allah says, La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha, because Allah does not burden a soul with more than it can bear, because men were liable to find that overburdening, to find that overweening, that expectation. After the children are not nursing, but they are like toddlers. A lot of the cases that I've seen is that it's actually just like American civil law. There's a judge that decides, you know, when the children are kind of in infancy, what is the right arrangement. You know, both the man and woman should submit to arbitration. You know, what is best for the children, right? Thinking about what's best for the children, and then, you know, the man would be obliged to provide something that is also, you know, stipulated by some relevant authority. After the children are a bit older of age, say older than 10 or 11, he has the right to demand their custody, in as much as he's still financially responsible. You know, in as much as he's, you know, still completely responsible financially, you know, he has the right to, you know, demand their custody, or he can forfeit that right and work something out that works for, you know, him and the mother of those children. The reason why this is so different is that Western civil law does not recognize any distinction with regard to gender in responsibility toward the children. That both men and women are assessed only on the basis of their income. So that if the woman earns, you know, more money, then she bears the greater share of the financial responsibility toward the children. And if the man earns less, then him less. Whereas in the Sharia, if the woman earned $10 million a year and the man earned $10,000 a year, the children would still be his legal responsibility. And that's the reason why financial responsibility, that's the reason why that looks a little bit different. I don't know, is that making it clear, or is it still a bit unclear?
No, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
Sheikh, I have a really quick question. So, if
Yes.
a man is unable to provide for his wife financially, is he sinning? Is he in a state of like sinfulness?
Yes. I mean, it depends. I mean, sinfulness is a strong term, because it might not be willful. It might not. I think the word sin, and I'm thinking now just about connotations. The word sin makes it sound as though he is intentionally engaging in some iniquitous practice, some evil act. He should see himself as negligent. He should see himself as not meeting his responsibility, although he might have some justifiable excuse. I got laid off. I got, I might, he might have some, I'm trying, he might have some justifiable excuse, but he should know that he is not meeting his responsibility. His responsibility is not being met. And thus he is in a state of, he's not meeting his responsibility. I think the only reason I'm uncomfortable with the word sin is that, it's just like, a woman has certain obligations with regard to her being a wife and certain responsibilities to her husband. But if she has some health issue and she's not able to meet that obligation, she wouldn't be sinning. It's just I'm unable to furnish this aspect of what my husband needs from me, and that the law says I'm obliged to offer him. But it would be a sin. It would just be a situation. So I think, on the one hand, yes, the man is negligent. He's certainly not. It is his responsibility, and it's not getting done. That's the important thing. It's his responsibility. It's not happening. If he wants to continue being her husband, he needs to figure out quickly a way to make that happen. On the other hand, this is where we're not. Some people are, right, but most of us, we're not in our marriages as lawyers, right? We're in our marriages as committed partners that are deeply invested in each other, not only financially but emotionally, spiritually, and our investment in each other is a holistic investment. So if the man is unable to meet his obligation, I think a concerned partner wants to know why. What's happening? Is it maybe there needs to be some mentorship or some counseling, or maybe he suffered a blow to his confidence due to some factors that maybe happened during his last job or something. Who knows? But I think that it's usually not advisable to bring up the legal piece. It's usually not advisable to say, well, and then too, yes, I think it's important that we acknowledge if we're going to act according to the tradition. Much of what we're doing in terms of our relationships and our orientation to work, to money, is not traditional, right? And all of us know that. So I think sometimes it feels a little disingenuous and a little duplicitous that we know that we're living kind of like as modern Muslims with very modern kind of understandings of work and ownership and partnership, etc. But when we start talking about financial rights, we want to go back to the 8th century. Now it's like, well, wait a second. Now wait. I mean, that certainly is a woman's right if she wants to say, look, I just want to do this by kind of the black ink law of the Sharia. This is his obligation. I don't want to spend anything. I don't care what I do, what I make. I don't plan on spending anything on my own housing, my own, kind of upkeep, maintenance. I mean, she certainly has that choice. But I think a lot of the strong partnerships that I see are partnerships that there is some kind of shared understanding, some kind of, mutual agreement in terms of, what we're paying and how we're paying it. And if, one person is incapable of pulling their weight for a time, then maybe the other person picks up that weight. And I just think I guess I'm giving all of these caveats because I want to be careful not to offer, just like I wouldn't offer a brother the law as a substitute for developing a meaningful relationship with his wife, right? If a brother was saying, I have a right to intimacy, I would say, Yanni, yeah, I mean, it's spoken of that way in the legal books, that you have a right to intimacy, but no man that's ever been married to a woman that he fully appreciates her humanity thinks that intimacy operates in that way, right? That we have to understand that the law is operating on a certain track and a real relationship is operating on a different track. It's like, I have a right to intimacy. What does that? I mean, sure you do. I mean, what does that mean? What does that? Yeah, okay, but like figuring out why your wife is disinclined to intimacy is going to serve you much better than telling her you have a right to intimacy, some kind of legal right to intimacy. Similarly, figuring out what's going on, with a husband, why, he's unable to kind of hold up his end to the bargain, and like, what's up, in terms of, you seem to have lost motivation. I'm not seeing a lot of ambition. Seems that you've fallen into some kind of malaise, and that has kind of left me overburdened with, some financial obligation. What's up? What, what kind of help do we need to get back on course? Reminding him that he has a legal obligation and that he's sinful if he doesn't. I don't know. It certainly wouldn't be the way that I would advise you to approach it, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
No, alhamdulillah.
So somebody had a question about how you feel about polygamy nowadays.
Somebody wants to get me killed. Well, the more important question is, how do I feel about staying alive these days? I actually just wrote an article that you can find on the islandprogram.org, about the topic of polygamy. And, well, number one, it's not in any way indicative of a lack of love for the sunnah of the Prophet, or a poor understanding of one's religion. If a woman just decides this isn't for her, that I would never, if a woman decides that, I know myself well enough to know that such a marital arrangement would never be satisfactory to me, because of, say, my I just couldn't countenance the idea of sharing my husband, or I want to be loved exclusively. I don't want to be in a relationship with someone who's in a relationship with anybody else. All of that is fair game. All of that is, none of that is indicative of a lack of religious piety. In fact, I think all of that is indicative of a heightened knowledge of one's self. If you know that that's something that I couldn't imagine myself ever doing that. To those women, and perhaps to those fathers that also feel like that about their daughters, I'm pleased to inform you that the Prophet ﷺ was talking with Ali ibn Abi Talib, and Ali expressed to him, of course, he was married to the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, Fatima, and Ali expressed to him, I think I want to get married again. And the Prophet said, no, you don't. It's one of those funny, these are one of those funny vignettes of the seerah. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I think I want to get married again. He said, not in my lifetime, not while I'm alive. You won't do that while I'm alive. And Ali said, why? Because I think it would cause Fatima some pain. That's my daughter. No, you won't do that when I'm alive. Right? So my point is, to have a a personal disinclination to polygamy is not. It's not. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing for people who can imagine that. People who are not troubled by that. People who can imagine themselves in a plural marriage. I think polygamy represents, by people I mean men and women who can imagine themselves in plural marriages. I think most men, in my experience, they don't think about we have and I'm saying a lot of this, and I'm just kind of restating what I mentioned in the article. I think it's natural. It's naturally we don't see a lot of morally inspiring examples of men in plural relationships generally. We don't, there's no, we don't see a lot of morally inspiring examples of that. The only examples we see of that are womanizers, cheaters, players, adulterers, philanderers, etc. I think it's very clear how this impacts women, right? So that if a woman hears that a man is involved in a plural relationship, I think without even thinking about it, there's a subconscious connection to all of those bad categories that I just mentioned. So that no matter what is known of that man, that is kind of the valence through which she sees the man. And I think that's just because of how we're conditioned culturally. Plural relationship equals bad man. I think what a lot of men are surprised to learn is that that is also the case for men as well. That most men don't, when they think about a second marriage, they don't think about a second marriage in the same way they think about a first marriage. A marriage, of course, even though we know, when two people are getting married, I think we know that the life that they're preparing for together contains a romantic and intimate component, and we're happy that they will get to enjoy that. But we also see a relationship that is going to demand the best of them in terms of patience, in terms of understanding, forgiveness, cooperation. We see, it's like we commend them. We know that the two people will get to enjoy a romantic relationship, and that's cool. But we still look at the choice that they're making to express their affinity for each other in this way, in a deeply moral way. It's like, this is a good man and a good woman doing a good thing. A lot of men don't look at second marriages like that. They don't think of them as like second engagements with family. They think of them almost explicitly in sexual terms. They think of it as a side piece or a jump off, or they don't really think that everything the first marriage entailed in terms of responsibility, financial planning, everything that comes along with the marriage, they don't think that, okay, you're getting that in all of the disagreements, the arguments, the issues we had to resolve, ways that your patience was tested, ways that the depth of your love and all that, okay, that happened once, and now a man is electing to have that happen twice. That's not how, it's just weird. It's not, never, I don't think, when most men think of a second marriage, they think about it as kind of an additional sexual relationship that doesn't have, all of those other components that we know marriage has. I think as long as that is the case, we're culturally not ready on both fronts. As long as that's the case, as long as we think about, a second marriage in that way, women don't see anything morally inspiring about it. They think about it as just a kind of a religiously sanctioned cheating. Obviously, they're not going to be able to regard those men or those marriages with any integrity, and they're not going to, be able to be a part of that. Similarly, if the men don't see it as kind of like, okay, tireless family man pulls double duty, if men are not thinking about it in the same way that when they say, marriage is tough, when married people say, marriage is a beautiful struggle, they're not thinking about a second marriage as another beautiful struggle. but rather thinking about it as something frivolous and enjoyable to indulge, as I really did with the real stuff of building a life with another person, with my wife, then men aren't ready either. So I guess I would say, I think there's some potential there. I think there's some opportunity there, but it's going to require a lot of shifts in our understanding. And culturally, I don't know if that's possible for American Muslims to shift culturally, where we need to shift to embrace polygamy with any degree of integrity, if that makes any sense. Beyond that, too, I mean, I mentioned that, our society is one that is founded on a monogamous ideal, right? So, when people ask me, what are the major impediments to practicing polygamy? I said, well, the biggest one probably is that it's illegal. That's the biggest one is probably that it's illegal. You can't forget that. Which, okay, I understand people that view marriage as kind of a private religious matter, and they view the sanction of the state therein is irrelevant. I get that, right? But it still presents problems in terms of inheritance, filing your taxes, various kinds of insurance, just trying to secure some upward mobility for your family, doing that with 2 families and maybe now 8 children. It becomes a huge challenge to imagine certain things that I think are also very important in Muslim communal life. But I don't know, in terms of what I think about, I think there's some potential there, but the community will ultimately make its decision about polygamy going forward. I don't know. Other things, inshallah. Wow, I'm surprised I didn't get like a lot of pushback on that. I mean, questions don't have to be about, someone's unmuting. Bismillah.
No, I have additional topics, but I wanted to just see if anybody else had any questions before we sort of shifted. Because I think we had 5 different, and I think you've answered already 2 of the topics, but does anybody, before I go to the next topic related to marriage, have anything to? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So I think this probably fits good, but one of them is and you've touched, I think, a lot of it, but is on the marriage rights, where are the non-negotiable rights of men and women in the Sharia?
Well, I mean, non-negotiable, even the non-negotiable is negotiable, right? If a person waives any of their rights, they're fully autonomous in that, in that regard. If a wife decides that, my husband doesn't need to support me, I'm independently wealthy, and that's not required. It's okay. She can make that decision. Similarly, I think, if I'm just speaking to some legal realism here, the husband's only right, kind of agreed upon right across schools of Islamic law, is access to intimacy. And again, this is something that has been mentioned as a right, but it's not something that is enjoyed in a robotic way that compromises, a woman's humanity. It's not like, okay, this is my right now. That's all immaturity and silliness. But rather, the access to intimacy is kind of like, okay, if we're thinking about marriage in terms of, and by the way, this is not like Muslim apologetics, or I'm not an apologist, mashallah. You know, I studied this tradition, and I try to teach this tradition with some integrity. So, you know, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, I believe in the collection of Abu Dawood, and he asked this question rhetorically. He says, "How does one of you strike his wife like an animal and then expects to sleep with her at night?" This is a sign. This is an authentic hadith, right? From that hadith, we can extrapolate that abuse of all kinds, physical, verbal, emotional, kind of undermines the idea. Like, the Prophet asked men, how imbecilic is that? How counterintuitive is that you would strike your wife in the day and then expect to be intimate with her at night? What are you thinking? That's stupid. So we're not saying, when we say it's a right, we don't, I want to talk about, I think, the usefulness of it being conceptualized as a right, but I want to also make sure that I, make clear mention that we don't mean a right like, okay, this is my right, let's go, something like that. It's conceptualized as a right, because for a man to assume the non-negotiable rights that we've, the obligations that every husband kind of by default assumes, the question that I think every self-interested person could rightfully ask is, okay, if I do all of that, I provide the housing, the complete, living circumstance, and with kindness, what is owed to me? What is owed? What do I get for doing that? And I think that a lot of women, I think this language, again, this is legal language. So I get, if this doesn't feel like how intimacy is discussed in relationships, you're right, it isn't. But from a legal perspective, it's like, okay, if I do all of that, like all of that's my legal responsibility, right? To provide the housing and the food and the clothing, all of that I have to do, right? What do I get? And the answer, nothing, or you're owed nothing for that. You do that, and Allah will reward you in akhirah. Would at least strike me as a person looking at the law inequitable, imbalanced, right? Like, so he has these responsibilities, and he gets for that nothing. No. So the access to intimacy is mentioned as a right, because I think it kind of provisionally balances kind of the rights and responsibility. But of course, women also have a right to intimacy, and that aspect and component of marriage is never about rights and laws and legalese and legality. It's just it just isn't. It just isn't. That's not the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and that's not the way of any responsible man that intends to fully respect a woman's person, to talk about his rights to intimacy or something like that. But it is mentioned as a right, just as his providing is mentioned as a right of hers, if that makes any sense. These are usually like hot button topics. I'm really surprised at how quiet everyone is. or maybe this stuff is making people uncomfortable. Wa alaikum salam.
I suppose on a lighter notes in the spirit of newlywed life. So what lessons, like on a day-to-day basis, like from the life of the prophet or from the beloved women around him, can we learn small things or ways of interacting with one another that fosters like a healthy, happy sort of marriage?
You know, the one hadith that for me kind of sums it up is this long hadith of Zara. It's in the Shama'il of Imam al-Tirmidhi. It's in this collection of hadith. And it's one of the longest hadith that, that I've ever, kind of recited at a public hadith gathering. And I had to read the entire thing. It's just very, very long. And the hadith starts with Aisha telling a story to the Prophet of 10 different, and this is like an old kind of Arab wives' tale, of 10 different women talking about their husbands. So these are women sitting around and they're all, I guess, gossiping about their husbands, right? Now, the first thing that really jumped out to me about this is that the hadith is so long and there's no interruption. Oh, let me see what's going on in my house. One second. All right, 1 second. Hold on. Hey, what is it? What is it? Makita, what's going on? Hadia. Hadia. Babe. Just another day in paradise, Ada. Another day in paradise. What happened?
I'm bored.
You're bored. Okay, Dad's almost finished. We'll do something, okay? All of that because she was bored. SubhanAllah. But the thing that jumped out to me most about this was that it was so long and the Prophet listened without interruption. That was the first thing that my teacher, he said to me, you want to know what it takes to be a good husband? Look at how long this story is. And the whole time the Prophet is listening without interruption. And then there's the 10th woman describes a man that's very generous and very ambitious too. Very generous, very ambitious, very wealthy. And she mentioned that this man, spoiled her and gave her and treated her very nicely, but then he divorced her and he met a younger woman and he married that woman. And the Prophet said, and that was Zara. And the Prophet said to Aisha, I am to you like Abu Zara was to Zara, except that I will never leave you. Right? I am to you, in terms of my generosity to you, my, and it's expressed in very, very high level Arabic. Aisha was a very, very good Arabic speaker. My generosity to you, my care for you, my love for you is such, like the 10th woman you described, what she had with her husband, that is what I have with you, but I will never leave you. And I remember my teacher saying, the other lesson that we have in this is affirmation. That, for something to be felt is one thing, for it to be expressed is another. So the Prophet had no problem expressing to Aisha that, this is how I love you. In another hadith, she would ask him often, how is your love for me? She wouldn't ask, why do you love me? If you ever want to hear a man stumble over his words or say something absolutely uninspiring, just ask him why he loves you. It's like, because but she would ask, she would ask, how is your love for me? And the Prophet would say, what? My love for you is like a tight, firm knot. Right? It's like a tight, firm knot, indicating that the quality he wanted to be known in his love was its resilience, not He could have described it as a fire. My love for you is like a fire. The Prophet, peace be upon him, very intentional with his words always. So it's like, how is your love for me? It's like a bonfire. It's like this. It's like he said it's like a tight, firm knot, indicating that the thing that he felt was most important to highlight about his love was its resilience. It's a tight knot. And Aisha would often ask him, when she would see him, she would say, Ya Rasulullah, how's that knot? How's that knot? And he would say, Ala halatiha, the way that it always is. The way that it always is. How is that knot? Oh, the way that it always is. Right? Or, that the Prophet ﷺ would even going to and then spending time, making time. I mean, this was the messenger of God. He has all sorts of stuff to do. And once he was invited to a meal, and he said, Aisha is going to come with me. Is that a problem? Is that meaning like this wasn't? They didn't say we want to speak to you and her. Of course, Ya Rasulullah, we just want to host you. And he said, well, my wife is going to come with me. Is that okay? Who's gonna say no? Say no. Of course. Of course. And this is where in the Maliki madhab, they actually say, Imam Malik was actually asked a question. You see this in the Mudawwana. Is there any harm in a man eating with his guest and his wife at one table? Because of course the Arabs, they really didn't do that. The men ate with the men and the women ate with the women. But the Prophet ate with a company of men and Aisha sitting beside him eating. And they said to Malik, so can this be done? Can a man eat with his friends, his guests, and his wife by his side? And Malik said, of course, as long as it's done with adab, as long as it's done with etiquette, nobody's looking across the table at each other, making passes, playing footsie, and no, we all respect each other here. We all acknowledge certain boundaries here. There's nothing wrong with that. Another thing that I remember hearing that was very, very beautiful, and this is something only a wife would notice. This was very, very beautiful. She said that Aisha said that oftentimes if she were sitting and she were drinking from something, that the Prophet would request the vessel and he would make sure to turn the cup to where her lip marks were. He would put his lips on her lip marks and drink it and then smile at her. Things like that. Just staying, being playful. And, when you think about the Prophet ﷺ and his family life, that I think, in ways that I think would be edifying for newlyweds, one is service, for the men especially. He was a man of service. They asked Aisha, what did he do at home? Because men want to follow his example, so they want to know, this is the messenger of God. And by the way, the reason this is particularly significant was that, Allah's messenger was an example for men in many ways. And they appreciated his gentleness, but they also thought of him as a man that was, macho, for lack of a better word. Thought like, he's a man's man. He's a guy's guy. So they wanted to know, so what does he do at home? And maybe they were expecting an answer like, he sits with his feet up, thinking about Allah and, reciting the Quran while I serve him, And she said what? He served his family. That's what he did. Getting things that we needed, taking care of us, doing things that we, he served his family. That was the Prophet ﷺ. What did he do at home? He served his family. And then she mentioned to these men, Aisha did, that he mended his own shoes, he sewed his own clothes, he milked his own goats. So if you're thinking that Islam has turned men into like these tyrants that wasn't the messenger of Allah. He did things for himself. He served his family. And then the other part of that is just being very affectionate, being very loving. One of the and I don't know how much this has changed. I don't know how much, and mashallah, on this call, we're all adults. And I think these are things that are very important. And it's not so much what's being done or what's being said here. It's how much what's being done and said challenges what were kind of conventional misunderstandings of that time. You know, in the Jewish tradition, they used to believe that when women were on their cycle, the men and the women should sleep far apart from each other. In fact, in some older, you know, Jewish traditions, very conservative Jewish traditions, the women had another area of the house that they would sleep when they were on their menstrual cycles. And people were asking Aisha, so at that time of the month, what did the Prophet do, alayhi salatu wasalam? And she said, he would still lay next to me, caress me, hold me, which I think is very, very important. You know, it means that in a situation in which the Prophet ﷺ knew that there wasn't going to be any intercourse, he was still affectionate in a way that wasn't self-serving. He was still meaning like, okay, I know that that's nothing of that sort is probably going to happen. It's definitely not going to happen because that's a rule of the Sharia. But he was still very present and very close and very affectionate and very loving and very emotionally responsive. So, you know, Aisha was really informing people like, you know, this is how he was. You know, this is how he was, alayhi salatu wasalam. And I think if we can just bring even a tenth and an ushur of that into our households, in our interaction with each other and our affection toward one another, we'll see the impact of that. We'll see how that shows up in our marriages, you know, and also very playful, you know, when you hear the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, describe him, you know, they describe him like as a cheery person, you know, a person that was very easygoing and a person that, you know, didn't like argumentation. You know, even Aisha, she would say if she said something that the Prophet didn't like, he wouldn't retort. He would just lower his head and he would become noticeably quiet. And that was the way that she would know that she did something that he didn't appreciate. I mean, for me as a husband, I'm just like, this is such a high standard, man. You know, I mean, I talk for a living. So, you know, of course, I want to argue about everything. I mean, look, nobody can beat me talking. Nobody, you know, you're not going to out-talk me. If, you know, she the Prophet, he didn't do that. He wasn't like that. So. And then she would say, Tubtu ilallahi wa rasuli. I must have done something wrong. You know, I must have done something wrong because I can tell, you know, that you didn't like something that I said. But he wouldn't actually raise his voice to say, I don't like this. Why did you do this? What happened here? It just wasn't that kind of person. And, you know, I think that, you know, we have to work on making our, you know, homes places of safety, places of security, you know, places of deep love and deep friendship. That's the sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him. That's not, like I said, some 2020 soft Islam. This is, you know, the things that I'm quoting to you. These are things from the core of the tradition. These are things from, you know, authentic, time-honored, you know, books of hadith and seerah. You know, this is how the Prophet was. You know, once, you know, in terms of like conflict and things like that. Of course, the Prophet, peace be upon him, you know, was in a plural marriage, was in a polygamous marriage, or polygamous marriages. And on one occasion, he had brought a dish of food from Zainab bint Jahsh's home, his wife, and he was eating that food in the home of Aisha. And Aisha looked out and saw him eating from the dish with some of the companions. With, you know, he had company with him. It wasn't that he was alone. And Aisha looked out and saw that they were eating from the dish of another woman in her house. And she just threw a rock at the dish of the food and broke it. Just came out, just smashed the dish of the rock. I mean, she smashed the dish with a big rock. The food got everywhere. Do you know that the Prophet, ﷺ, he didn't like jump up and say, you embarrassed me, or you tried to hit me with a rock, or what's going on? He looked at the companions and said, uh-oh, Aisha's upset. Uh-oh. it appears that you know, he said, Bismillah, you know, Aisha was upset, and then, you know, after he, you know, picked up the shards of the dish, he just said to Aisha, you have to replace you have to replace her dish. You know, you had no right to destroy her property in that way. And Aisha, you know, replaced the dish. But she's narrating the hadith, talking about just his magnanimity of character, that he didn't take her to task and give her a religious reminder about jealousy and about anger and about rage. He just accepted that, okay, the fact that I brought this dish here was maybe not a good idea. And that was that. You know, these are the things that I really think about as a husband that I find really help me. You know.
That was so beautiful, Sheikh. Jazakallah khair.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Other things. Oh, we're almost out of time. Bismillah. So I guess we'll stop there. We can pick up from anywhere, inshallah, next week, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal 'asr. Inna al-insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilu s-salihati wa